Metaphor ReFantazio, a game developed by Atlus that has become the blueprint for the perfect RPG. I could talk for hours about its simple, effective combat, reminiscent of Atlus's other games such as Shin Megami Tensei and Persona. Combat that brings a challenge to the player without outright denying them the gratification of winning the battle. Should you lose a battle, you know there's something you could have done better. A turn that maybe didn't go the way you thought it might. Or, I could pivot and talk about its lush, sprawling environments. Grand Trad, with its prim and proper anglicized main streets, to its intricate, confusing back alleyway slums, showing the intense divide between races in this world. Maybe I speak more on the port city Brylehaven, filled with bustling couriers and shopkeepers, stalls and stores littering every turn and twist, fully reminiscent of a city built on trade. I am not speaking of a flawless game. It's easy to find issues with the narrative being more predictable as the game goes on, or that much of the world building of Uchronia lies in optional sections. You may find issue with director Katsura Hashino's writing itself, as you would in the Persona series. But I will admit, I am hard-pressed to find many flaws at all with Metaphor's crown jewel. The shining success of this game lies with its characters. I want to preface this with a few things. Firstly, there's no way I can dive into all of the characters in the video as deeply as I want to. Seeing how the characters evolve and grow throughout the course of the game's story is some of the best development I've ever seen in fiction. Hulkenberg in particular becomes one of my favorite characters of all time by the end of the game. I think each and every follower deserves their own video. Especially this motherfucker. Holy God above, does he deserve his own video. Secondly, kind of related, but I'm not touching on every follower. I'm actually only going to be discussing Strohl, Hulkenberg, and a third playable party member who could be regarded as a spoiler. Besides this last follower, this is all information that's discovered or can be discussed in the first 5 to 10 hours of the game. I want to talk about these followers in particular, half as a characterization study, and half because of their early introduction to the protagonist, how they interact with us, and how they as characters really set the tone for the beginning beats of the story, especially our first topic.
My name is Leon Strohl de Haliatus. My home and my family were taken from me. I am the last of my house, I am the last of my noble bloodline, and in the name of my people, I will strike you down where you stand!
Strohl's story begins with his and the protagonist's enlistment as knights. Early on, Strohl quickly establishes himself as a fundamentally good-natured character, particularly in his response to the protagonist's experience with segregation, which targets them due to their Elden heritage. At this point, it is important to touch on the tribal tensions that exist within the world for those who are unaware. I had initially written a more detailed discussion of the various tribes and their hierarchical relationships, but I realized that could be an entire essay on its own. Given the focus of this video, I want to keep it brief. Clamar, notable by their horns, and Rusant, notable by their ears, are two of the most populous tribes. They reside in positions of power or military might. Nydia, notable by their eyes, and Ishkia, notable by their big-ass wings, are the middle tribes, where many of their race fall into entertainers and scholars, respectively. Literally everyone else is below these four races. Ujif, little bat people who are quick but not very tall, lead them to mostly keep to themselves. Mustari, an indigenous tribe who believe in something other than sanctism, this game's primary state religion, that leads the church to brand them as pagans. Parapus, a populous tribe typically used for test subjects or experimentation due to their animalistic features. And Elda, the race of our protagonist. There's so few of them that many believe they've been wiped out. Strohl is one of the few characters at the beginning of the game who does not seem to be bothered by the protagonist's heritage. This is a prominent contrast with the discrimination the protagonists face throughout the game. While many of the party members the protagonist encounters may initially display distrust or disrespect, they do not show outright hatred. Sometimes their reactions are more characterized by a sense of pity rather than animosity. Despite the racial tensions, the followers the protagonist meets are generally reasonable if initially skeptical. When I first began to play this game and I met Strohl, I was concerned. I believed that Strohl was going to fall into the same role as many of the Persona characters do, the lovable idiot best friend slot, like Junpei Iori of Persona 3 and Ryuji Sakamoto of Persona 5. It felt cyclical, and I was getting ready to see how Strohl's characterization was going to fit right into this mold. It's safe to say that he doesn't fall into this characterization at all. Strohl is a nobleman, a member of the Clamar tribe and the son of House Halietis. Strohl was privileged growing up. 7 years before the events of the game, Halia, his town, was burned to the ground and destroyed by a human attack. Strohl was forced to flee from his hometown, leaving his parents and his childhood behind. To this day, this attack remains as the primary reason Strohl despises humans. But because of his noble background, or perhaps in spite of it, he is a just man. An intelligent, principled man who looks to take action rather than remain passive. Perhaps it's because he believes he can change the world he lives in, or because he doesn't want to relive what he's been through in his village. Because of his intelligence and his characterization, at this point I'd like to bring up a fascinating criticism that I've seen a lot. At some milestones in the game's story beats, it begins to feel like Strohl is the protagonist rather than our character. Strohl really stands out as someone who could realistically fit right where our character does. The game would probably be as engaging and character-driven as it is normally, but that's more of a slight on our protagonist and the game itself rather than Strohl. It's really more telling about how good of a character Strohl is. He has a quick temper, especially when discussing the destruction of his village. He doesn't just passively accept the way things are. Instead, he actively challenges the world around him, even if it means pursuing a dangerous path. To him, change requires action, and it's not going to get done by just watching. This is part of why he enlists in the Guardsmen to begin with. He's not backed by gigantic coffers. He's backed by his own skill with a sword. That's actually shown a lot in Bond conversations with Strohl. You will find that aboard the Gauntlet Runner, whenever you decide to spend time with Strohl, you will spend time cleaning weapons. All these things that Strohl has learned mostly from his father, but has translated into this instrument that he can use to change the world and prevent what happened to Halia from happening anywhere else in Uchronia. Once more comparing to previous Atlus games, to see the juxtaposition between Strohl and characters like Junpei and Ryuji, it's a breath of fresh air. Don't get me wrong. Junpei's character arc specifically is perhaps one of the greatest evolutions in Persona history, and Ryuji becomes the very necessary, dependable, quick-tempered foil to the calm, reserved Joker. Even Persona 4's Yosuke has his moments of brilliance that are often underrated. But I'm of the opinion Persona 4's characters in general all have kind of the best characterization of the series. Those characters have their places in the high school setting of Persona, but the high fantasy setting of Metaphor ReFantazio calls for different approaches to familiar molds. Strohl truly exemplifies that new approach as just the first example of how this world and setting can and will be different.
My name is Iselin Pacelli Majal Hulkenberg. I am knight, I am commander, and last of the honor guard!
I'm going to talk a little bit less about Hulkenberg because I believe her character really begins to shine late game. In keeping with the consistency of speaking about things in only about the first 10 hours, I'm really only scratching the surface. That being said, what is there is still compelling. Hulkenberg is at first a distant knightly character who really seems like she'll fit under the umbrella of dedication and honor. As a member of the King's Guard, her primary duty was the protection of the royal family, including the prince. This role demanded her loyalty and discipline to be paramount. But beneath that formal exterior, lies a woman who has been profoundly shaped by her internal conflicts. A woman whose sense of self is constantly tested by her perceived failures. Hulkenberg was born in the Principality of Monterio to a family of political influence. Her father and her brothers all took jobs of political power, making Hulkenberg's choice to become a knight much bolder, an act of self-determination to show that she was driven by a different purpose. Yet despite this determination, this choice often haunts her. Throughout the story and the Bond conversations, Hulkenberg's faith in her own worth is deeply questioned, both by others and by herself. She's particularly troubled when she's confronted with the possibility that she may not be strong enough to protect those she has sworn to defend. This shines through in her failure to prevent an assassination attempt on the prince, a catalyst that serves for much of her internal struggles. Despite this doubt, Hulkenberg typically finds ways to right the ship, continuing to be that royal pillar of discipline, until she spots food that's unique and bizarre. Then that dignified, disciplined exterior of Hulkenberg is stripped away as she induces in quirky food tastes that consistently either disgust or unnerve her comrades. These moments of brevity are welcomed in the game's story. This isn't her only quirk that we'll see throughout the narrative, but it's one of the more consistent ones. The breaks in her armor are really refreshing, and it makes the moments where she begins to open up to her comrades much more impactful. In fact, she opens up to us the most. While the Russant are generally more physically built and far taller than any other race, it's very clear that there's a stark age gap between our protagonist and Hulkenberg, and even Hulkenberg and Strohl. While she's not the oldest member of the party by far, she is one of the most mature, dealing with issues of self-doubt and internal conflict that don't necessarily plague our protagonist and Strohl to the same extent. So the fact that Hulkenberg opens up to us to begin with is a testament to how much she respects the protagonist after their initial meeting. She sees us as skilled, strong, if a bit reckless, and after taking a leave of absence from the knighthood as long as she did, I get this sense that there's a companionship there that Hulkenberg hasn't felt for years. It's an understanding between Hulkenberg and the rest of the party, a distant connection that grows deeper and deeper as time goes on. She's driven by this deep sense of responsibility to protect others, including the party members. There's this code of ethics that she must follow, especially when it comes to knighthood. When there are knights or others in power that aren't acting in the best interests of the people like she believes they should, Hulkenberg will challenge their integrity boldly. She is bound by honor, even more so than Strohl is. Her mind is tactical. Military prowess is her strong suit, but as a result, Hulkenberg finds herself a little less skilled in matters of outside-the-box thinking. But overall, Hulkenberg quickly becomes this persistent presence that stands as the voice of reason throughout the story. She is down to earth, but in contrast to Strohl, Hulkenberg fits more closely into the archetype of characters that Atlus likes to place into these slots. She's much less of a mold breaker, and her role is similar to Persona 5's Makoto or Persona 3's Mitsuru. This isn't a slight on Hulkenberg as a character. That sort of mature guardian archetype that explicitly aims to be honor-bound and disciplined is one that fits perfectly into the setting of high fantasy that Metaphor so easily embraces. And as the story continues, Hulkenberg becomes an irreplaceable part of the protagonist's party. Past this point, the characters that join your party could be considered spoilers for those who haven't played the game. While marketing of this game has shown plenty of party members and allies that I haven't discussed past this one, this next character is one of the most interesting and unique that I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing in my 20+ years of gaming. In fact, the thought of talking about this character is why this video idea came to mind in the first place. If that sounds like a character you'd rather interact with on a personal level by playing the game itself, then I'd like you to skip to the conclusion of this video by moving to the timestamp here. If you're still here, then that's wonderful. Let's talk about one of my favorite characters in Metaphor.
I am Heismay Noctul. I believe the arc of life depends not upon birth. By these hands, soiled or sinless, I fight!
Heismay is virtually our first interaction with the Ujif tribe as a whole, outside of a few brief interactions with Lena during the tournament. Heismay is accused of kidnapping children and taking them to a sandworm's nest. A scuffle ensues once he and the party meet, before Heismay ultimately claims his innocence and the party searches for the truth. The supposed bounty on his head soon falls apart after the party realizes there's nowhere he'd be able to keep the children in somewhere as dangerous as the den. His innocence is confirmed soon after the children go missing yet again, while Heismay is bound and kept in the party's runner, and he joins the party as a playable member. Heismay's history is tragic. During a Parapus riot, his son was attacked and beaten to death. There was nothing Heismay could have done to save his son, and the grief that he feels at his death is something that resonates throughout the story. Before the death of his son, Heismay believes he was a different man. During conversations with him, Heismay specifically highlights a point in his life where he hated indecisiveness and felt he was driven and relentless in his quest to become a knight as a Ujif. The loss of his son shook him to his core and has completely changed Heismay's direction. He doesn't know how to navigate his own grief. Even at the threat of capture by the party, Hulkenberg calls Heismay out for holding back his blows, remarking,
Or perhaps you could not bring yourself to kill a young man.
Heismay states that he could barely find reasons to live for, save for honoring his son. This is why he locks himself away in a sandworm's cave, a dangerous place where his life could be forfeit at any second. Heismay's self-preservation becomes self-sacrificial as the grief continues to consume him without being processed in a healthy way. And so Heismay naturally turns to alcohol. It's heavily implied, if not outright stated, that Heismay began drinking to try and cope with the death of his son. By the time of the game's story, Heismay is a little more mellowed out when it comes to drinking, typically only doing so in the form of a toast with the protagonist during Bond conversations. It's a slight, gentle sign that Heismay might be healing, if only for a moment. Heismay is a man that is caught between the past and the present. He is imperfect, and wise enough to be aware of his own imperfections. For instance, Heismay holds significant disdain for the Parapus people due to the riot that caused the death of his son. It's a real distrust due to his wounds that were left unhealed, and it's a stark contrast to the rest of the party members. Yet it's a very real flaw. Not everyone is perfect, and he is the first one to admit it. Despite these flaws, Heismay is a man of loyalty and duty, perhaps eclipsing the duty and honor that Hulkenberg has. His moral compass is strong, even if it's clouded by grief and the burdens that weigh upon him. Heismay is a reserved, careful character, and one that I can't say fits well within any of Atlus's former character slots, similar to Persona 5 Sojiro or Persona 4's Dojima, but I think the fact that Heismay is a playable character actually changes quite a bit. Sojiro and Dojima are generally unaware during their respective stories of the main character's exploits through most of the game, while Heismay is right alongside the protagonist, fighting and reacting to the main story beats. It adds another layer to Heismay in that he gets to see the protagonist evolve and grow during the game's main story, instead of hearing about things after they happen or just generally being oblivious. It adds even more layers once it's revealed that the protagonist is about the same age as his son would be. The idea that Heismay gets to see this young man grow and evolve during the story is somewhat heartwarming and somewhat poignant in all the same breath. It's extremely refreshing to see a character like Heismay given a premier spot in an Atlus story. I think Heismay is one of the most unique, unironically real characters I've seen in fiction, and they are only one party member in a group of great ones. Metaphor's crown jewel are its characters. As I mentioned, it is not a flawless game. These characters themselves are not flawless either. There are imperfections. Just as Metaphor shines itself despite its flaws, the characters do the same. Sometimes those very same flaws help highlight the greater qualities. I believe this story and the stories that are told by these characters are some of the most quality work Atlus has ever produced. I haven't even delved into the later characters of the game, some of whom, like I said, deserve their own video with their respective stories and uniquities. I could even make videos of the same length talking about the music and how it has a diegetic purpose, the combat, the world building of Metaphor. But those are for future me. Right now, in this very moment, I'm going to reminisce about these characters. The nobleman, who doesn't judge the protagonist for who they are. The ever-protecting knight, bound by honor and a solemn duty. And everyone else who joins the protagonist in his journey through Uchronia. The evolution of these characters throughout the story is a tale best told by the game itself. In doing so, if you haven't already, I hope you think back to my analysis. I hope you see the things that I see, and I hope the stories that these characters tell don't fall on deaf ears. Thank you for watching. I love you all, and please take care.